But there is another story which has broken, which like moments before it broke, I got another text from a buddy who was like, the Bucks just fired Adrian Griffin. Now, let's kind of set the story correct here. Okay, and this is actually the perfect show. One, we're the perfect show because I'm not an idiot. I know about the NBA. Secondly, I have connections with the NBA, talked to people already, even in the 15 minutes since it's broken. Third, Dan Byer, who's alongside every day, is a gigantic Bucks fan. And whereas the rest of us, like, I watch Bucks games, but I can't tell you it's appointment viewing. Dan, would it be fair to say somewhere between 50 to 75% of the games you view a portion of them?
Yeah, a little less than before. I would say about 50.
Okay.
Yeah. Right.
Which is a really, if we're honest with ourselves, it's a really, really high percentage. Okay? Like, I like to think I watch most every Laker and Clipper game. And it's like, why the hell do I have cable if I'm not going to use it to watch these games, which you can only watch on Spectrum Sportsnet for like the Laker games locally in Southern California? But in reality, like, there's games which, like, I didn't see that game. I was watching a college game, or I was working, or I was having a life, right? So 50% is a lot of games. So there's a bunch of things to it. First, there's the Doc Rivers element. Doc Rivers is out there. I've been told it's already done. He's going to be the next head coach of the Bucks. Woj is reporting that they're planning on quickly pursuing a veteran head coach, most likely Doc Rivers. It's the old, you guys remember the movie Hunt for Red October? The average Ruski doesn't take a dump without a plan, son. Fred Thompson, right? Is that Fred Thompson out of that line?
That is correct. Yeah.
Right? These deals you don't just fire a coach and go, okay, now we're going to go look for a coach. Like, that's not how it works. He's in his first year. They have the second best record in the East. So you're like, well, why would they possibly do that? They're also bottom 10 in defense, and this is a franchise that's built around defense. And here's the real thing. Here's what really happened. Giannis made this hire. The original hire. Okay, because Giannis was ticked off. If you remember last year in the playoffs, why they lose? Giannis didn't play the first two games. He was hurt. Then when he came back, okay, why am I blanking on the head coach? He'd been with the
Mike Budenholzer?
Bud Budenholzer. It's again, why is it Budenholzer, but everybody calls him Coach Bud? Anyway, nobody calls him Coach Bud. But Budenholzer wouldn't put him on Jimmy buckets, and Jimmy gave him buckets. Is that accurate, Dan? Like,
yeah, he was hurt early in the series, and then the Heat. Yeah, he missed games. 2 and 3, I believe. Came back in Game 4.
Right, but if you remember, like, Jimmy Butler single-handedly won him a couple games, and you're like, why isn't Giannis guarding him? And Giannis after the game was clearly upset at the defensive decisions because Bud is a guy who and this happened all the time. He has a system, and that's what they do. Right? He's like the defensive coordinator who, hey, our cornerbacks don't match up to wide receivers. One's on the left, one's on the right every time. That's how Bud operated. So he got his guy who was on staff, Adrian Griffin, the job. But this is what happened. You go from a franchise that's built around their defense. They were built around their defense with Bud. Scored just enough points, hit just enough threes around Giannis. If he makes his free throws, we're going to win games because our defense. You trade for Damian Lillard, who doesn't guard anybody, and he's little. Right? He's not Trae Young bad defensively, but he's in that conversation. And some of the other pieces have aged as well. And you lose Drew Holiday, who Drew Holiday doesn't need the ball as much to be successful, is a great defensive player, a good offensive player. The entire makeup of the team switches, and I think generally most people weren't blown away by the coaching. And the thought is, we don't have that big a window. We got to win in these next 2 years while we have these guys, and this isn't the guy. And, oh yeah, by the way, had Giannis not said, this is my guy to hire, you could have had Nick Nurse. You could have had Doc a long time ago. You could have had Frank Vogel. And you could sit there and go like, what? Frank Vogel's won a championship. Frank Vogel's got the Eastern Conference Finals with the Indiana Pacers. He has a better resume. He's done it more. Again, it's a different kind of coaching. It's a completely different kind of coaching in the postseason and coaching for defense and for specific things than, who Giannis wants. And I would also say there's a little, the owner of the Bucks is now, right? Jimmy Haslam. Where's that name from? Cleveland Browns. Right. So I don't know if it's about the fact that, they got everybody to extend and to kumbaya because once they got Damian Lillard and like, now that we got you, now we're going to go get the coach that we want. But my guess would be there's a little bit of coaching envy, right? You look at the job Nick Nurse is doing, you look at the job that Frank Vogel's doing, and you're kind of unimpressed, and they're not getting any better defensively with the Milwaukee Bucks, and you're a little bit frustrated by it, and it's the best player's buddy, guy he likes as the coach, and you don't feel like guys are being held accountable, you make a move for a guy who we can pick apart Doc Rivers all we want. He's done it for a long time. Of course, he's won a championship, and he handles championship egos better than anybody else. All right, what's your reaction there, Dan Byer, as the guy who watches about 50% of the Bucks games?
It's interesting because you were like some out there that were shooting out warning flares about a month ago on this team. And I was not ready to hit any panic button at the time. I still felt that there was a feeling out process. But we've also seen over the last couple of months, you mentioned Giannis. Giannis has been a bit more vocal in what he wants for the team, in some of his disgust, maybe despair could be a better word. But he doesn't always do that. And so that was very unique. You also had the incident leading up to even before the season started where Terry Stots walked away because of a reported incident that he had with Adrian Griffin.
Right. So people will understand, okay? Terry Stots, very well respected in the league. Like a beloved guy.
Yeah.
And you know who loved playing for him? Damian Lillard. Okay? So that does not go over well. Like, the people that are texting me are like, no one's really that bummed that he lost his job because people think that Terry Stots got done wrong and that Terry Stots is a good guy. By the way, Terry Stots, wasn't he the head coach of the Bucks before?
Yes.
It's like the weirdest thing. Like, do people understand how much you have to sacrifice your ego to walk back into a building? You used to be the head coach and be the assistant coach, and then you get MF'd, likely, by the head coach who has minimal experience in comparison, and you're like, wait, what?
This is also Joe Prunty's second stint as the interim Bucks head coach.
Right, that was after Jason Kidd?
Yes.
Yeah. And Joe Prunty, by the way, is brilliant. He's the offensive mastermind. He draws up all the stuff on the board. He's really good. That's why he's around.
I think his first order of business should be change your last name.
Prunty?
Yeah, that's a horrible last name. They should have gotten to him and said, you know what, change it, make it more digestible. It's probably why he hasn't been a head coach full time in the league. That's just my guess.
Yeah, no, I don't think that's really I get it. You're bringing levity to it, but this is I actually like the move from the Bucks standpoint. Right?
I do too. I'm with you now.
It's like if you've watched the Bucks, you're like, this won't work. This is not going to work when it matters, right? Is that fair?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, they gave up a
right. So if you go like, hey, this won't work, let's try something else. Let's try and figure out that this won't work. Why should we wait until June? Then we're all mad. Then we got to figure out what we do then. When right now we do it now, maybe we got a chance to fix it. And I would wonder. I can tell you that the Darvin Ham thing is not working with the Lakers, and they're talking about making all these changes. Wouldn't stun me if Doc's camp was like, hey, the Lakers are thinking about making a move, and the Bucks are like, you know what, fine, we're done. We're done with this. Let's move on.
It's crazy to think that you would do this at this point. But then, as you said, in reality, it's not so crazy when you think of what happened in the summer, what's happened in the fall, what's happened on the court. I mean, they had back-to-back wins against the Pistons, but a couple nights ago, they're in a dogfight against Detroit.
Yeah.
What do you...
Detroit stinks.
Yes.
Detroit's one of the worst teams in the history of the sport.
Yeah.
The other part, okay, and help me out. When Ty Lue took over, was that the year that they won? Did they win it that year?
Yes, and in fact, it's almost to the day. I looked this up. I believe that David Blatt was fired on January 22nd of 2016.
And David Blatt, who is a friend of mine, he's been, every time I've been to Israel, been incredibly kind, right? He's an expatriate who went and played at Princeton, played overseas, became as historically significant a coach in FIBA basketball as there's ever been. He came in and he couldn't get the buy-in from LeBron. He just couldn't. And again, like it doesn't, there's no one way to do it, but when it's not working, at some point somebody's got to come in and go like, hey, look, I'm going to write the check. You're going to go away and we're going to try something else. And that's what was happening with David Blatt. Right? It just wasn't working. And again, that doesn't mean this will be a Ty Lue, but there is precedent for it. Right? There is precedent for a midseason coaching change that works. I believe when Pat Riley led the Heat to an NBA championship, didn't they get rid of Stan Van Gundy midseason? Remember Stan Van Gundy wanted to spend more time with his family?
Sure.
Middle of the season? You're like, really?
Well, it'll be interesting to hear what comes out of Milwaukee over the next 24 hours, because when they moved on from Jason Kidd, Giannis was very close to him. Now, Giannis is a different person then, obviously a younger version of who he was. Took it very hard. You would have to think, to what you're saying and what we've said here, is that, yeah, Giannis probably played a role in this decision. Even if he was a part of the interview process that brought him in, he just has not seemed to be very happy over these last couple of months. And so I'm curious to hear what his point of view is.
The hardest move you're going to make, okay, in basketball, two moves. Okay, the 18 inches over from assistant coach to head coach, and from the bottom or middle of the scouting report to the top of the scouting report as a player. Okay? And the reason is it's the same, but it's completely different. Right? It's the same, but it's completely different. When you're the assistant coach, you can have that great line of communication with your best player, and you can give him advice, and you can watch film. And when the head coach subs with head, like, I don't know what he was doing, man. I just, whatever. But when it's you, all those relationships change. Okay, and then the dynamic of this team changed when you brought Damian Lillard in. And again, like when I say you brought guys in, it changes things. Everybody assumes that makes them a bad person or it doesn't. Okay, just Damian Lillard has done it his way for a long time and been rewarded financially and in terms of respect. No one ever blamed Damian Lillard for Portland not winning, ever. No one ever said, Damian's really got to play more defense. He's got to pass the ball more. He's got to create. No one. It was always the coaching isn't good enough. The surrounding players aren't good enough. Now you go to a place where Giannis is king. And Giannis not perfect. Yeah, he's not perfect at all. But he's won. He had 50 in a walk-off NBA Finals game. He was the Finals MVP. He's the league MVP. He's the face of Milwaukee sports. And you walk in and, hey, I've never really played this way. And the guy who I've played for, I have a great relationship for, got run off by the head coach in really ugly fashion. Like, that's a different dynamic. The NBA gives us something that no one else does. They just give us this drama and entertainment when we're not expecting that it is a beautiful thing.
I'll also add this 2 cents in, because you mentioned David Blatt's scenario. Mm-hmm. For Wisconsin sports fans or Milwaukee sports fans, it may not be as tight of a window as it was, but 15, 16 years ago, when the Brewers were trying to make a push for the playoffs in 2008, they fired Ned Yost with 2 weeks to go in the season because they were trying to end this playoff drought. And you're trying to do all that you can, and Dale Swaim ended up taking over the team. They made the playoffs. They ended up doing so. It came at the expense of Ned Yost. And that may be the scenario here. If they end up changing things around and turning it around, not that Adrian Griffin has all of what Ned Yost did, but it's not the same, but it isn't unheard of when you're talking about a team that has a lot at stake in making a change with your manager or head coach.
Also, you mentioned 2 names, which, if you go to the name registry, I'm going to guess that Ned and Dale are two of the bottom ones, right? Like nobody names a kid Adolf anymore, rightfully so, right? There's no Adolfs, even though there used to be before there was one Adolf. There was also Adolf Rupp. There's some other Adolfs or whatever, but Ned and Dale. Nobody goes Dale.
No, and
right?
Ned,
we're talking Ned and Dale, and we're not talking NASCAR either. That's the other thing.
Ned got the last laugh getting the World Series with the Royals. So there's and maybe Adrian Griffin will have his day someday, but it won't be in Milwaukee.